Stop! Stop! Please! Sell her to me! The stepmother hissed with a wicked smile. Go with her if you think you can endure her stinking life. From that moment, everything changed. This is not just a story. It's a warning. It's a lesson. And trust me, you don't want to miss a second. So, besties, grab your seat, hit that subscribe button, and stay with me till the very end. The full story. Heart of Nyariba village, cruelty was not a secret, it was a sport. Everyone knew it, everyone saw it, and yet nobody cared. That day, the market was alive with shouts of traders, clinking cowbells, and gossip louder than the flies buzzing around baskets of fish. But in the middle of it all, a scene unfolded that froze the noise. A woman, Malika, sharp-tongued and bitter as unripe mango, was beating a young girl in the open square. That girl was Lena, her stepdaughter. Orphaned on her father's side, forgotten by her mother's people, Lena had lived like a shadow under Malika's roof. She wasn't raised, she was used to fetch water, to scrub floors, to be the punching bag whenever Malika's tongue grew tired of insulting her. That day, Malika's rage reached a boiling point. Right there, in front of the whole village, she slapped and shoved Lena until the girl stumbled on the dusty ground. The people around? They stood, they stared, they whispered, but no one moved. After all, in Nyariba, someone else's pain was just part of the scenery. Then, from nowhere, a man stepped forward. Kato, the man who lived on the far end of the village, past the old baobab tree in a farm that smelled of soil and silence. Nobody really knew him. He hardly spoke, never laughed, and lived alone, like a ghost among the living. People respected his strength, yes, but kept their distance. Some said he chose solitude. Others said life had forced it on him. But no one ever called him friend. On that day, Kato hadn't even come for trading. He was passing by on his horse when his eyes landed on the spectacle. His animal slowed, as if it too sensed something wrong. Kato saw more than the blows. He saw what the others had grown blind to. Abandonment. Pain served raw while the whole village gawked. His boots hit the ground with a thud, and for the first time that morning, silence fell. Malika froze mid-swing, her hand still raised but trembling slightly under his gaze. Kato's eyes weren't loud, but they carried weight. Don't beat her again, he said slowly. Then, after a pause, added, Sell her to me. The market gasped, Sell her? To him? Malika scoffed, tugging at her wrapper and letting out a sharp laugh. Sell her? To you, Kato? You don't know what you're asking, but fine, take her. Let's see how long you last with this useless rat. Her words dripped venom, and she spat on the ground, like she was throwing Lena away with her saliva. But Lena wasn't listening. Her ears heard the words, she's free, but her mind couldn't process them. Freedom had never been in her dictionary. Kato extended a hand. She flinched. Could she take it? Was she even allowed to? Before she could decide, he turned and began walking away, his horse following behind. He didn't order, didn't threaten, didn't even look back. But Lena's tired legs carried her forward. Because behind her, there was nothing left. The villagers, they stayed where they were. Some women muttered prayers under their breath, others shook their heads, but nobody stepped in. Nobody offered shelter. Because in that place, Lena was not a person. She was scenery, background, forgotten furniture. The walk to Kato's farm was silent. He didn't speak, and Lena didn't dare. From time to time he looked sideways, just to check if she was still behind. And she was, limping, dusty, bruised, but moving forward, for the first time, following someone who wasn't dragging her. The farm's wooden gate groaned as Kato unlocked it with an old iron key. The sound echoed like a drum announcing change. He pointed at a small clay house with a porch. You stay there. There's bread, water, a bed. Take it if you want. No lecture, no pity speech, just plain instructions. Lena didn't answer, didn't even thank him. She slipped inside quietly. The door shut, and Kato stood outside, staring at the sky that couldn't decide if it wanted to rain or shine. He had bought someone's freedom with only his voice, and now he had no idea what to do with it. Inside, Lena sat on the bed like she didn't belong. She stared at her palms, raw, blistered, still stained with dust and dried blood. Then her fingers brushed against the clean sheet. White, smooth, untouched. She hesitated, afraid to stain it with her existence. That night, for the first time in forever, she slept without tears. No dreams, no nightmares. Just sleep. And sometimes, that alone is enough to begin again. Kato's land stretched wide. The soil was rich but merciless. It gave nothing for free. You worked for every grain, every harvest. That was the kind of place Lena had arrived in. Not a home, not yet. But not the prison she had known, either. And so began the story, nobody in Nyariba saw coming. The story of two broken souls, one beaten by life, the other abandoned by people, finding themselves on the same farm, under the same sky. Not as master and servant, not as man and wife, but as strangers tied together by one strange fact. Neither of them had anyone else. So the next day, the wooden gate of Kato's farm shut with a slow groan, like even the old wood knew something unusual had just happened. Almost as if the gate itself whispered, well, here we go again, new chapter. Inside the farm was nothing grand, but it carried a certain kind of peace. The clay house stood plain, its porch shaded by crooked beams. The air smelled of firewood and roasted flour, the kind of scent that usually reminds you of home, if you had one. But Lena didn't. She lingered at the doorway, one dusty foot still outside, as though invisible guards were waiting to shove her back if she dared to step in too far. All her life, she had been made to feel like an intruder in her own home under Malika. So here, she was too scared to even breathe freely. Kato didn't press her. He just pointed with his rough, calloused hand towards a side room. The door hung half open, showing a simple bed covered in a faded blue sheet, a jug of fresh water, and a folded mat in the corner. Nothing fancy, but compared to the bare floor she was used to, it was paradise. With slow, dragging steps, Lena walked in. She ran her fingers over the wooden bed frame as though checking for hidden traps. No shouts, no insults, no shoes flying at her head. Only silence. And that silence, heavy and stubborn, became their third companion in the house. The first days. Lena did what she always knew, work. No one told her to, but old habits die hard. She woke before the sun, swept the porch, fetched water, scrubbed pots until her fingers ached. She moved like a shadow, always expecting Kato to bark orders, but he never did. As for Kato, he left at dawn, long before the rooster finished clearing its throat, and only came back when the sun dragged its tired shadow across the ground. When he walked in, Lena would lower her eyes, and he would walk past like she wasn't there. Still, there were signs. One evening, he left a warm loaf of bread on the table. He didn't say a word, just walked out. Minutes later, Lena touched it with trembling hands, nibbling slowly like someone expecting a slap to snatch it back. But the slap never came. The next day, the bread appeared again. And again. Small gestures. One morning, Kato was feeding his goats when his eyes caught Lena in the yard, scrubbing a blackened pot. The sun hit her face, making her squint, but she didn't stop until the metal shone like silver. To anyone else, it was just cleaning. To him, it was different. It wasn't about the pot. It was about her. This girl, beaten and spat on all her life, was scrubbing her dignity back into existence. That night, without a word, Cato left an extra blanket in her room. The evenings were growing cold, and her light cough had been tugging at his ears. She noticed, of course, but said nothing. She just pulled the blanket up to her chin and, for the another time in her life, slept without tears. Little by little, Lena's touches began to change the house. The windows, once dull, were opened wide to let in air. Clothes were no longer piled in corners, but lined neatly on ropes outside. Even wildflowers, plucked from the edges of the farm, began appearing in clay pots on the porch. Nobody told her to do it. She just did. And Cato noticed. Oh, he noticed. Every detail. He simply never said a word. But his eyes lingered longer, his gaze softer than before. One evening, he returned from the fields to find the old wooden gate repaired, sanded, tied tight with new rope. Lena's hands were busy in the garden, her back turned to him. For a moment, he just stood there watching. Then, without comment, he went inside. Dinner, as usual, was a silent affair. The only sound was the clinking of spoons on plates. But one night, Lena finally whispered a word. Her first word in that house. "Thank you for the room." Her voice was so low it could have been mistaken for the wind outside, but Cato heard it. He didn't reply with words. Instead, he rose from his chair, fetched a fresh candle, and placed it by her bedside. A small gesture, but to Lena, it spoke louder than 1,000 sentences. "I heard you. I see you." Slowly, the silence between them stopped being empty. It became a bridge, a language of its own. Lena no longer walked with bent shoulders. She began to look forward, not down, as though daring to believe she was allowed to exist. And Cato? For a man who had never known how to care for anyone but himself, he was learning. Learning that kindness wasn't in speeches or promises, it was in the small things, in keeping the door open once someone has walked in. On that lonely farm, tucked away from the gossiping mouths of Nyariba village, 2 broken lives were quietly learning something no one around them would understand. That sometimes healing doesn't begin with big words. It begins with silence, but with bread left on the table. So days turned into weeks, weeks into months, but in Nyariba village, time was never counted by clocks or calendars. Who cared about hours when gossip told the time better than any sundial? A raised eyebrow here, a head lifted there, and suddenly, the whole market knew what you had for breakfast before you finished chewing. So when Lena started lifting her head just a little higher, when her back, once bent like a reed under Malaika's cruelty, began to straighten, the stares followed, and with the stares came the whispers. On the wooden benches near the square, where old women stitched clothes and stitched lives together with their tongues, the chatter started. "Did you see?" croaked Mama Jalia, whose raspy voice was as famous as her big ears. "That farmer, Cato, took the girl into his house, right there, in front of everyone, like he was buying a goat. I saw it with my own eyes," another woman clucked, shaking her head so violently her headscarf nearly fell off. "Pity? No. They say Cato was just tired of sleeping alone. Bought himself a wife, young and fresh, just the way men like." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, just the low rumble of thunder before rain, sweetened with sarcasm, sharpened with envy. Of course, no one said it to Cato's face. Who had the courage? The man wasn't known for smiles, and his words, few as they were, landed heavier than sacks of grain. His straw hat always shaded his eyes, but even that couldn't hide the fact that he wasn't the type to be joked with. Respect mixed with fear. That was Cato's reputation. So the gossip stayed in corners, behind doors, at the riverside, where women beat clothes against rocks louder than they beat their husbands. Ooh. But Lina didn't answer the whispers, even though she wasn't deaf. She caught the fragments, saw the side glances, the bent smiles. Still, she kept working, washing, sweeping, gathering firewood. She didn't want to be invisible, but she didn't want to be a spectacle either. She existed in between, haunted by her past, hesitant about her future. Then, one morning, the corral fence broke. Cato called his neighbor, Mr. Cum, to help him fix it. While they hammered nails into tired wood, a voice drifted from across the road. "They say he even serves the maid coffee now," a woman sneered, her tone dripping sarcasm. "But is she a maid or a wife? Hard to tell." Cato paused mid-hammer. He didn't look up, didn't reply. Instead, he drove the nail harder, each strike louder than the insult, as though the wood itself could absorb his anger. That evening, when he returned home, Lina was sweeping the porch, her hair tied back neatly. He stopped, leaned against the doorway, and finally said in a quiet, gravelly voice, "They're saying I bought myself a wife." Lina froze. The word bought stung like pepper in a fresh wound. Shame rushed to her cheeks, though she had nothing to be ashamed of. She kept her eyes on the broom, not daring to look at him. Cato sighed, shifting his weight. "I didn't buy a wife. I bought freedom, that's all." His tone was plain, not heroic. Raw, like dry soil before the rain. He didn't owe the world an explanation, but for once he gave one, for her. Lina's throat tightened. She nodded slowly, not daring to speak. But in that tiny gesture something solid was born. Not love, but respect. But then gossip evolves. Of course, gossip never dies, it mutates. Soon the women of Nyariba claimed Cato had bought Lina new clothes. Some said he let her sleep late. Others swore he'd softened, and that the whole arrangement had another name. Still, curiously, no one ever dared say it to him directly, until one afternoon at the market. Cato was speaking out okra seeds when Mama Jalia, bold as ever, leaned closer. Cato," she croaked, her voice sticky with mischief. "They said the girl is running your whole farm now, huh? And also that you've gone soft." Cato lifted his eyes. Slowly, heavy seconds passed, his gaze fixed on her until she shifted uncomfortably under the weight. "I take care of what's mine," he said, his voice slow, steady. Then after a pause, "And of other people's freedom too." That was all. No drama, no long speech. Mama Jalia lowered her eyes. She never brought it up again. In Nyariba, silence could slice sharper than any insult. But life has a way of testing peace. The weather in Nyariba was as moody as a jealous wife. One week, the sun baked the earth to dust. The next, cold winds swept through the mountains, sneaking into homes, rattling rooftops, and chilling bones. It was during one of those sudden turns that Lina began to cough. At first, a small irritation muffled into her palm. Then came the fever, strong, merciless, the kind of fever that breaks you in ways nobody can see. The next morning she didn't rise. The water jug in her room remained untouched. The broom leaned lowly against the wall, and the air carried the sour smell of sweat. Kato noticed. Not the chores, not the silence of work, but the silence of movement. He called once, nothing. He called again, still silence. He pushed her door open with the gentleness of someone bracing for bad news. Lena lay curled in bed, her skin flushed, eyes half closed, breathing shallow. One hand dangled off the bed, trembling like a leaf in a storm. She didn't have the strength to speak. Neither did he, but action spoke louder than words. Kato walked back to the kitchen, fetched a clean cloth and a bucket of water. He soaked the cloth, wrung it out, and placed it on her forehead, changed it when it warmed. Placed another on her neck, lifted her head gently to feed her spoonfuls of thin porridge. No fancy skill, no healer's touch, just plain, stubborn will. The same hands that once only knew how to plough fields and mend fences now tried to mend a girl's burning body. And for the first time in a long time, Lena wasn't fighting the fever alone. That first night, Kato didn't sleep on his bed. He sat right at the edge of Lena's, his back stiff, his eyes wide, alert like a guard dog waiting for trouble. Every time her fever made her mumble nonsense, he leaned close and whispered, "You are staying, no running this time." It was like talking to smoke. She was too far gone in her fever to hear him, but the words weren't for her ears. They were for his own stubborn heart. By the second night, her body burned hotter than a charcoal stove. She jolted awake once, tried to sit up, then flopped back like a weak chick. Her eyes darted around, wild, confused, unsure if she was safe or back in Malika's suffocating hands. Kato grabbed her hand, not tight, but firm enough to ground her. "Easy. You're safe. I'm here, right beside you." The way he said here, it wasn't about four walls and a roof. It was a promise, a ground no one else had offered her before. Shelter, protection, maybe even dignity. Lena's eyes fluttered. She exhaled shaky air and slipped back into sleep. That night was endless. Her body was fire, her breaths shallow, her skin slick with sweat. Kato kept moving, wringing out the cloth, laying it across her forehead, swapping when it got warm, and when the silence grew heavy, he filled it with something he hadn't done since boyhood. He sang. Old lullabies his mother used to hum when fever had tried to drag him into the grave. His voice was rough, broken in places, but the words carried stubbornness, faith maybe, or just desperation. He didn't know anymore. He only knew one thing. Not this girl. Not now. Not after everything. On the third night, the wind finally died down. Her fever broke, not suddenly, but like rain soaking into dry earth, slow and merciful. By morning, Lena's eyelids fluttered. The world was still blurry, but she saw him. Kato slumped over the edge of her bed, fast asleep at last, his head resting on his arm. His hand still brushed hers, as if even in sleep he refused to let her drift away. She didn't speak. She didn't dare. She just watched him. It was the first time in her whole life that someone had kept watch over her, not for work, not to control her, not to command her, but to guard her. When Kato woke, his body ached like he'd been beaten, but his eyes carried a quiet peace. He went straight to the kitchen, boiled bitter tea from muansa leaves, and carried it to her. She grimaced when she smelled it. "No, yes," he said, pushing the cup forward. His voice left no room for argument. "It's disgusting, but it heals." She sipped, coughed like it was poison, and glared weakly at him. He smirked. Not wide, not obvious, just a small, crooked thing on his lips, the kind of smile villagers swore the man didn't even know how to make. Days passed. Lena's strength returned bit by bit. Colour returned to her face. A little sparkle found its way back into her eyes. Cato never spoke about those nights. He just went about his farm work like always, but something had shifted. Now, when he left bread on the table, there was often a wildflower beside it. Small, yellow, carefully picked. Lena noticed. She didn't ask. She didn't dare. But she noticed. She began waking with more than duty in her chest. The smell of fresh coffee, the neat, folded cloths on the line, the quiet man who called her name not like a command, but like an acknowledgement. For the first time, she started to feel like somebody. The fever hadn't just burned her body. It had burned down the last wall between them. Then, one Saturday, Cato went to the market in the nearby town. He was picking through sacks of flour and seeds when something hanging in a stall stopped him. A dress, blue, simple, not flashy, not fancy, scattered with tiny white flowers. The fabric was light, soft, and it reminded him of the quiet afternoons when Lena swept the porch in silence. He didn't think much, didn't analyze, he just bought it. Maybe it was gratitude, maybe affection, maybe guilt for all the years the world had stolen from her. He didn't explain it to himself. When he got home, he didn't knock, didn't announce. He just placed the folded dress on her bed and walked away. Later that evening, Lena found it. She unwrapped the bundle slowly, fingers trembling. When she saw the blue fabric, her chest tightened. Not joy, fear. It was too beautiful, too good, too impossible. Not for me, she whispered to herself. She folded it quickly, shoved it into the drawer, and pretended she hadn't seen it. Cato noticed. Of course he noticed. He didn't ask, didn't push. But that night, while tending the fire, he spoke without looking at her. If you don't want to wear it, that's fine. But you should know you deserve nice things. Lena froze. His words felt heavier than the dress. Her face flushed, but her lips betrayed her. I'm not worthy of that. Cato stopped stirring the fire, wiped his hands on a rag, and turned his head slightly toward her. His tone was calm, steady, with no space for pity. You're worthy of respect, and of choice. That's all. He went back to the fire, and that was it. No speech, no romance, just truth. But truth sometimes heals sharper than love songs. For truth sometimes heals sharper than love songs. That night, Lena lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His words echoed in her mind like drums in the distance. You are worthy of choice. It hurt, because she had never believed it. It healed, because someone finally said it. The following week, on a cloudy Sunday, Lena finally pulled out the blue dress, careful, almost reverent, as if handling holy cloth. She hung it outside, watching it sway on the line, half afraid someone would come and snatch it away. Days later, with no occasion, no warning, she slipped it on. Just another morning of sweeping floors, but this time, she wore the blue dress. Cato was walking past the porch when he saw her. He didn't say a word, didn't widen his eyes, didn't tease, he just stopped, looked at her for a moment, and let silence do what silence does best. Say everything. And for once, Lena didn't shrink under the gaze. She stood straighter. But to herself, she looks like different. Not brand new, no. She still carried her past like a sack of stones on her back. But different. Lighter in the eyes, braver in the way she stood. The fabric swayed in the breeze. And for the first time, she didn't look like a shadow in someone else's story. She looked like herself. Later, while stuffing jars into the cupboard, Lena muttered almost to the walls, My mother loved dresses like this, blue ones with tiny flowers. Cato heard it. He didn't reply, he only paused, feeling something pinch in his chest. Not sadness, not exactly. It was the heavy realization that piece by piece, she was crawling back into herself. That night, Lena stepped out into the yard, feet bare against the cold dirt. The stars above Nuriba village twinkled the way they always had, but tonight, she saw them differently. The blue dress whispered against her legs in the wind, and she thought, I don't have to hide from what's beautiful anymore. Not because of the dress itself, but because a stubborn farmer once told her, you deserve the right to choose. Life went on in Nuriba as if nothing had changed. The sun still dragged itself lazily through the cracks of the window at dawn. The smell of coffee and burning firewood still clung to the house. Cows still chewed grass like gossiping neighbours, and Cato's hoe still struck the soil with his usual rhythm, the sound steady, almost stubborn. But inside Lena, something had shifted. A new silence was growing, not the kind made of fear, like in Malika's house where silence was punishment. No, this silence carried space. Space for her own breath, her own hands, her own choices. She began waking before the rooster crowed. Her body was still thin from the sickness, but her eyes shone with a quiet strength. She fed the chickens, scrubbed the clothes, swept the floor, no longer like a prisoner doing chores, but like a woman slowly claiming a home. The house sparkled, not because she feared a slap or a shout, but because she wanted it that way. Cato noticed, always at a distance, pretending not to. Not like a master inspecting his servant, but like a man in awe of a flower blooming in soil he thought too dry for life. One cloudy morning, it was planting day. Cato left early, plough balanced on his shoulder, heading to the fields. Lena stayed behind, deciding to finally clear the forgotten backyard, the one overrun with weeds and the ruins of an old chicken coop. While pushing aside dried branches and chasing away lizards that clearly paid no rent, she spotted it. A flower. A tiny yellow bloom standing proud in the middle of weeds like it owned the place. She froze. Something inside her stirred. She crouched down, hugged her knees, and whispered to the stubborn little plant. My mother loved these. Her voice was light, but full. The second time she had spoken of her mother since escaping Malika's claws. The words carried childhood laughter, buried grief, and the memory of a love that had been stolen too soon. She smiled, not wide, but real. The kind of smile that sneaks out when your soul finds one good memory under the rubble of pain. Amazing. Cato returned later, hoe heavy on his shoulder, his clothes painted in soil. He stopped when he saw her. Lena kneeling in the yard, holding that small flower like it was treasure. He didn't speak, just watched. She looked up, caught him staring. For a moment, she thought of hiding it, embarrassed by the fragility in her hands, but no. She held it steady and said, almost in defiance, it was her favorite flower. She used to say, flowers like these only grow where the earth still has a heart. Cato crouched beside her, pulled out the small pocket knife he always carried. Quietly, he dug a neat hole. Let's plant it again, he said. Lena blinked, surprised, but nodded. She placed the flower gently in the soil. Together, they covered it, patted the earth, watered it with water she fetched from the kitchen. When they were done, they just sat there in silence, staring at that fragile yellow bloom standing against the dark soil. It wasn't just a flower, it was a bridge. A fragile thread between the world Lena had lost and the one she was slowly daring to build. From that day, Lena began humming when she washed dishes. Her voice was small, half whisper, but Catan always heard it. He never interrupted. He didn't want to break the fragile magic of a voice returning to life. At the market, she started walking straighter. The women of Nyariba still whispered, because honestly, what else would they do? But Lena no longer shrank under their eyes. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, the kind you don't argue with. At night, she sat outside with a shawl on her shoulders, looking up at the stars. Sometimes she spoke softly, like to herself. Other times she just listened to the wind. And Kato, who had never been good with words, finally began to understand that love wasn't always about speeches or bold gestures. Sometimes love was exactly this: staying close, silent but steady, like a small flower daring to bloom in the middle of weeds. But life in Nyariba had a twisted sense of humor. Because the same road someone uses to leave is often the same road they crawl back on. That's how it was with Lex, Lena's father. Years ago, he had vanished. No letter, no visits, not even a cough to prove he was alive. He left her in Malika's hands like a sack of unwanted grain. And now, he came back, not as the man who once strutted around with charm and swagger, but hunched, coughing like a broken engine, dragging his feet into the same village he had abandoned. His arms, a baby boy. He had long forgotten a daughter he once abandoned, but the son of some other woman who clearly had less patience than a goat tied to a short rope. He staggered into the market, clutching the child, carrying a cloth bundle on his back. The baby screamed from hunger, and Rex's hollow eyes looked like they'd been carved out with regret. The villagers noticed. Of course they did. Yaruba has sharper eyes than a hawk when it comes to scandal. Some women spat on the ground. Others whispered behind their hands, their voices laced with venom. Look at him, the prodigal rooster. Carrying a baby now? Shame has weight, you see. Not one soul moved to help, and why would they? Everyone knew the story. When a man abandons his child, don't expect the village to rush with shade when he returns baked by the sun. Kato was there that day, trading potatoes for seeds. He spotted Rex instantly. Recognition hit like sour palm wine. This was the man who once threw his daughter into Malika's bitter claws, who disappeared without a trace while Lena learned pain the hard way. Kato didn't go near. He just watched, calloused hands tightening around his basket. Afterwards, Kato was fixing the fence when he heard a weak whistle at the gate. He looked up, and there Rex stood, smaller than memory, shrinking really, his back hunched, arms clutching the child, his cough rasping through the quiet. "They told me she's here," Rex croaked. His voice cracked like dry maize husks. "Lena, my daughter, I'm not asking for much. Just a corner, shelter, a few days." Kato folded his arms, took his time. His silence was a wall. Then he finally said, "She's here, yes. But she's not the voiceless girl you threw away. She's a woman now. She has a name, a home, and her own say." The air grew heavy. Just then, Lena appeared in the doorway. She was wearing the same blue dress, now faded, but still holding its quiet dignity. She didn't flinch, didn't shout, she just looked. And Rex, oh Rex, his eyes widened like he had just recognized the ghost of his own mistakes. First, he stared, as if his memory was refusing to believe. Then his lips parted, words trapped in his throat. Finally, the tears broke free. "Lena, my God, Lena!" But Lena didn't move, didn't smile, didn't even scowl. She stood like a wall carved from stone. For the first time in his life, Rex saw something in her he had never once given her. Dignity. Not borrowed, not gifted. Earned. "Forgive me," he sputtered, the words torn between coughs and regret. "I was wrong. Lena stepped forward, not to him, but to the baby in his arms. She studied the tired child, innocent in all this mess. She turned to Kato, who hadn't budged. Then she said, steady as a drumbeat, "The boy needs food." She walked inside, came back with a simple plate, food laid neatly on a clean cloth. She placed it on the table. No hug, no anger, no forgiveness. Just quiet justice. Rex ate slowly, every bite tasting of shame. When he looked up, Lena was already gone. That night, he slept on the porch, the baby clutched tight against his chest, the cold creeping in. Kato brought a blanket, not for him, no, for the child. By dawn, Rex was gone. No note, no begging, no promises, just gone. Maybe he finally understood that broken bridges don't mend with late-night apologies. Maybe he knew the truth. Some things can't be fixed, no matter how many times you show up coughing. Lena didn't cry, didn't mention it again. She just washed the dishes, swept the porch, and carried on. Kato understood. The deepest pain isn't the one that screams. It's the one that goes on living long after the scream has died. Unquote. After fate wasn't done twisting the knife, the house where Malika once ruled like a self-proclaimed queen had collapsed into ruin. The money that fueled her vanity evaporated. The neighbors who used to laugh at her jokes vanished quicker than smoke in wind. Her fine clothes turned to rags. The same voice that once thundered orders across the yard shrank into a hoarse whisper. And then, one dusty evening when the sky burned red, Malika reappeared. Not the sharp-tongued tyrant of before, no. This Malika walked barefoot, her hair wild, her body thin, her face hollowed out by hunger and shame. Pride was gone, eaten clean by life itself. She stopped in front of Kato's house, didn't knock, just stood there, trembling, waiting to be noticed. Lena came out, apron dusty with flour. Their eyes met. Between them rose the past, sharp, bitter, unrelenting. Lena didn't flinch, didn't run. "You need food," Malika muttered, her eyes fixed on the ground. "I have nothing, nothing." The words dropped like stones, sharp and empty. Every cruelty she had sown came back to her in that moment, wrapped in hunger. Lena took a long breath, went back inside. On the stove, there was rice, beans, a little roasted fish. She served a plate, not fancy, but generous. She covered it with a clean cloth, placed it on a wooden tray, and carried it to the door. She handed it to the woman who had once called her cursed, who had beaten her for mistakes real and imagined, who had stripped her of childhood. "Sit there," Lena said, pointing to the bench under the mango tree. Malika obeyed. Her thin fingers shook as she ate, each spoonful mixed with humiliation. Because never in her wildest fears had she pictured this day, the day she would be fed by the same girl she had starved. Lena didn't gloat, didn't sneer. She just stood there, quiet, watching justice unfold not through revenge, but through survival. And in that silence, Malika realized the truth. Cruelty had stripped her of everything, but the girl she tried to break had grown into a woman whose strength was greater than her hunger, her shame, and her past. From the cattle pen, Kato watched the scene unfold. He didn't interfere. He knew that moment wasn't his to step into. It belonged entirely to Lena. For her, it wasn't revenge, wasn't anger. It was a chapter closing, quietly, like a door shutting with no slam, just the firm click of finality. When the plate was empty, Malika set it aside. She sat there for a while, staring at the ground, looking like a woman trying to count regrets but running out of fingers. Then she stood. Lena had already turned back toward the house, apron still dusted with flour, when she heard Malika's whisper, "I don't know why you don't hate me." Lena paused, turned just enough to look over her shoulder, and answered, calm as rain, because whoever carries hate has no room left to plant peace. And just like that, she went inside. Malika shuffled off slowly, her feet raising little clouds of dust. Nobody knows where she wandered after that day. All people remember is she left with a little less hunger and a whole lot more regret. That night, Lena sat outside in the yard, steady as the moon. Cato brought 2 cups of hibiscus tea. They sat side by side, saying nothing. After a while, he said, "Today you showed more courage than most people muster in a whole lifetime." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. But when her eyes met his, there was a new kind of light in them. Because that day, Lena wasn't just fair. She wasn't just strong. She was free. And freedom, for someone who had once been treated like a possession, is worth more than any loud payback life could ever dish out. And at Cato's farm, life followed the moods of the sky. When it rained, they scrambled to plant. When the sun baked the soil dry, they waited. That year, the drought was brutal. The earth cracked open like old scars. The animals moaned louder. Leaves drooped in surrender. Even the birds sounded like they'd given up hope. The villagers of Nyariba whispered among themselves, "This year will starve us all. Better tie our belts tighter. Better pray harder." But Cato didn't join the whining choir. And Lena, she wasn't afraid. She swept the house as though cleaning away her past, folded clothes as if piecing together a new story. She planted flowers where no one expected them, poured water in the rice pot as if she was feeding hope itself. The corn held on, dry at the edges, but alive. The beans, stubborn little things, pushed up through the dust. Cato walked the rows with one hand on his chin, studying the plants the way a father studies his children. He knew nature worked like people. Treat it with patience and consistency, and it pays you back in its own time. One heavy, humid night, the miracle began. At first, faint drops on the roof, soft, like someone knocking gently. Then harder, faster, steadier. Soon the rain fell in torrents, drumming the earth like ancestral drums returning to wake the village. Lena dashed to shut the windows, but froze for a moment, mesmerized by the sight. Water washing over the dusty yard, leaves dancing like they'd been waiting for the party, the thirsty soil gulping down every drop. Cato stepped onto the porch, arms crossed, letting the rain drench him. No coat, no rush. He just stood there, soaking it in, while Lena joined him. They stayed side by side in silence, the storm singing the only song they needed. The following week, the land responded like a grateful child. Green shot back, stronger than before. The corn stood tall, proud as guards on duty. Beans spread fast, vines tangling like playful children. Even the cassava showed off with fresh blossoms. The harvest overflowed. Chickens crowed louder, the cattle fattened. The kitchen carried the aroma of plenty. Neighbours came nosing around, muttering, "Ah, you got lucky. The rain came just in time." But Cato knew better. It wasn't luck. It was peace. The peace Lena had stitched into that home every day with small, steady acts. Ever since she stepped into his life, the house felt different. The firewood burned steadier. The animals slept calmer. Even the wind, it seemed, passed by with more respect. She worked the home like a prayer, whispered with her hands. And he? Well, Cato was learning, slowly, day by day, that sometimes the greatest blessing isn't land or cattle, but the quiet presence of someone who makes everything steadier. One late afternoon, while gathering corn in the field, Lena suddenly stopped. Her hands were dirty with soil, sweat dripping down her face. She looked at Cato, who was heaving a heavy basket, and asked, almost casually, "Do you still want to buy me?" The question hit like a soft thunderbolt. Not bitter, not afraid. Just a clean truth, like someone finally able to look backward without drowning in the past. Like someone who knew shadows only linger when you don't light the right lamp. Cato stopped, set his basket down, straightened his back. His answer came slow, not from hesitation, but from respect for the weight of her words. No, I don't want to buy you. I want to share life with you, but only if you choose it to. Lena said nothing, but her smile said everything. A smile heavy with time, rooted deep, certain, because standing there in the middle of tall corn and damp soil, she understood nobody could ever buy her again. She was her own. For the first time, she was free to choose, and she chose to stay. There was no crowd cheering. No grand music, just the soft crackle of firewood, the smell of fresh bread, two people walking side by side without tripping over each other. The sky hung clear, clouds scattered like cotton left out to dry. The air smelled of washed clothes and wet soil. It looked like an ordinary day, but Cato knew. Days with Lena had long ago stopped being ordinary. They had become life. He watched her pour water into the garden with cupped hands, stir porridge patiently until it thickened, fold the bed sheets with care. This was the same woman who once arrived broken, silent, treated as if she were nothing. But now, she walked with her head high, with dignity, with freedom. And in Yariba village, that was louder than revenge, brighter than luck, and stronger than any storm. Also in the Yariba village, people liked to say love arrived like rain, sometimes sudden, sometimes slow, but always changing the soil it touched. And for Cato, the man who had lived alone so long even the chickens avoided talking to him, love crept in like a thief who refused to leave. Lena didn't walk behind him like a servant. She didn't march ahead like a commander either. She walked beside him, steady and quiet, like she had finally learned that her feet belonged to no one else but her. For years, Cato thought solitude was just being without people. But living with Lena made him realize solitude was really about lacking someone who understood your silence. And this woman, this survivor, understood his silences better than all the village gossips combined. It was after one tough morning in the fields, sweat sticking to his shirt and dust claiming his feet, that Cato made up his mind. Not because he was impulsive. Cato wasn't the kind of man to run after butterflies. But because some choices, if delayed, slip through your hands like water. And he wasn't about to lose this rare treasure life had mistakenly delivered to his yard. That afternoon, Lena was sitting on the porch. She wasn't in some queen's gown, no. She wore her blue dress, the same old one that had survived both hardship and time. But this time, she wore it without fear, without doubt, like the dress had been waiting for this very chapter. She was sewing a tablecloth, steady and patient. Cato came walking up, hat in hand, dust clinging to his legs like an extra layer of shame. He stopped in front of her, staring. He didn't speak right away. Lena raised her head, sensing something unusual in the air. "What's wrong, Cato? Did the corn finally ripen? Or are the goats planning another rebellion?" Cato gave a small smile. "The corn is fine, but I didn't come to talk about corn." Lena placed her cloth on her lap, folded her hands, and waited. Now, Cato was no showman. Don't expect kneeling, trumpets, or even sweet words stolen from the market poets. He wasn't that type, but when he finally spoke, his voice carried the slow, heavy truth of a man who knew the value of words. "Lena," he began, steady as a drumbeat, The world never gave you a choice. They took you, sold you, silenced you. But here, in my house, nothing will ever be forced. Here, everything you have is yours, including the right to say yes or no. The words hit Lena like rain after drought. Her chest rose with a deep breath, her heart thumping steady. He wasn't offering pity, he wasn't dangling freedom like a prize. He was simply saying, "You are yours first." She rose slowly, like a tree straightening after years of wind. She walked up to him and smiled, a smile that asked for no permission. And with her voice steady, she replied for the first time, "I want to." There was no applause, no fireworks. But the wind carried strength. The mango tree swayed like it was dancing. And even time itself seemed to pause just long enough to write their moment down in its secret book. Because Lena wasn't bought this time. She wasn't handed over. She chose. And that choice became the root of a new story. Planted in soil that once only knew pain, but was now ready for peace, respect, and love that didn't shout, but stayed. Don't imagine silk dresses, gold rings, and invitations with chicken feathers. No, this was Nyariba village. There was no glittering hall, no crowd of ministers or bosses pretending to be important. What there was? Fresh bread still steaming on the table, the scent of rosemary travelling across the yard, and 2 pairs of eyes that met without fear, without debt, without masks. The day was warm. The village gathered under the old mango tree, because in Nyariba, trees were better witnesses than courts. Kato wore his usual shirt, carefully washed for the occasion. Lena wore plain cotton, neat and proud, both barefoot, as if honouring the very soil that had carried them through storms. The villagers, who once whispered sharp gossip about Lena, now stood quiet. No mocking, no sneers. Because true love, when it walks in without drums or trumpets, commands respect, even from tongues that usually wag like loose goats. The ceremony was brief. Old Agatha, the midwife and keeper of Nyariba's sharpest proverbs, raised her wrinkled hand. She didn't waste words. May what began in pain bloom in peace. May the seed that was mistreated grow into a tree with wide shade. That was it. No promises on paper. No chains disguised as vows. Just words rooted in wisdom, heavy enough to last a lifetime. Of course, Malika didn't come. The stepmother had vanished weeks earlier, carrying her silence like a sack too heavy for anyone else to hold. Nobody sent for her. Nobody cursed her either. Lena didn't need revenge. She had outgrown that craving. What she needed was peace, and peace she already had. Her father, Rex, still roamed at the edges of the village. Thinner now, quieter, a shadow of his old self. Some claimed he was staying with a distant cousin. Others swore they saw him sleeping under the market shed. One thing was certain. He never knocked at Lena's door again. And Lena? Of course, she never had to lock it again. Because forgiveness isn't dragging your pain to dinner. It's letting your soul unclench, even if the world refuses to change. Afterwards, life at the farm rolled on. Corn rose proud. Beans ripened in their own time. The house, once heavy with silence, now breathed lightness. Lena often sat on the porch, a book in her lap, hair wrapped in cloth, looking like a woman who finally owned her story. Kato sometimes sat nearby, saying nothing, listening to chickens scratching, pots bubbling, life breathing. It was on that very porch, where everything had once begun with silence, that Lena said one evening, her voice calm but firm, "I thought I would die as someone's servant. But today, I am a woman who owns her name." Cato didn't answer with words. He just looked at her. Because some truths don't need repetition. They're carved daily in acts of care, in shared bread, in quiet respect. And so, the girl who once was sold out of spite became the woman who chose her own path. She was no longer a possession, no longer a shadow. She was Lena, whole, unbroken, and free. Because justice doesn't always ride in with swords and drums. Sometimes, justice arrives with warm bread, respected silences, and a love built slowly, patiently, and strong enough to last a lifetime. And so, hello viewers, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, life is full of lessons, sometimes hidden in pain, sometimes in laughter. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and always believe in your story. Please like, share, and subscribe for more amazing stories. See you in the next one.